Tell your wife not to worry about a thing. I'll get an ambulance and we'll have her there before the baby comes. Don't worry now. Sure, but don't worry so much. Goodbye now. Helen Jackson's baby is coming.
So I gathered. Isn't it wonderful? I bet she's glad. Why don't you take Fred along? Maybe he can help you.
Hey, that's a good idea. I'll take you.
Now, don't worry, Harry. And don't forget to tell the milkman to come every other day. And there's some rice pudding in the icebox for your supper.
No.
Mr. Jackson.
No. Hi, Mr. Jackson.
You have a baby girl, Mr. Jackson. And Mrs. Jackson's doing very nicely.
Thank you. Congratulations, Harry.
Well, hello, Pop.
You'll probably be the first woman president.
Have a cigar.
A baby girl. How nice. How much did she weigh?
18 pounds.
18 pounds?
Well, maybe it was 8. Oh, I don't remember. Everything happened so fast and all.
Well, it doesn't really make much difference as long as they're both all right, huh, Fred?
Honestly, you men are all alike. Don't sit up too late now.
Oh, we won't. And thanks, Aunt Jane.
Good night, dear.
Good night.
Nobody cares what time they get you out of bed, do they?
Well, a funeral director expects it.
Emergency director, you mean, don't you? Say, whatever made you take it up, anyway?
You really want to know?
Oh, yes.
You see, losing George Jr. in the war did a lot to me. For a long time, I've hoped that you would take his place here in the business with me. You know, the Bartlett tradition goes back a long time. My great-grandfather set up business in Centertown when James Madison was president. Because people knew of his skill as a craftsman, it was natural for them to go to him when a coffin, as they used to call it, was needed for a fellow townsman. Our neighbor's sorrow found many people, beside the cabinetmaker, performing a variety of services. There was the sexton to toll the bell and dig the grave, the town crier to broadcast the news, the neighbor or liveryman to provide a wagon and buggies, and the relatives to care for the person of the one departed. It was at about this time that my great-grandfather, who was a kindly and respected man, was asked to undertake many of these services in order to relieve the relatives of worry and of the burden of so many details. As the town grew, my family kept pace with it. When Father came along, he was giving full time to serving the needs of the enlarged community. One of Father's chief community interests was the building of our memorial hospital, the one we went to tonight. It took a long time to raise the funds, but he and his fellow committeemen, a doctor, a lawyer, and a clergyman, finally put it over. Father, of course, by now had taken his place beside these men in providing a fourth essential service to the community through the profession he himself represented. To George Bartlett for sharing his heritage of service. No doubt about it. Father was quite a fellow. I guess you were too young to remember him.
I remember him vaguely, sure. But look, Uncle George, I always thought there was a lot of money in this business.
There is some, but it does not all go to fellows like me by any means. Think of the contributing industries, such as steel. And don't forget that we are a frequent user of the nation's railroads. The chemical industry likewise contributes. And remember the important part that lumber plays.
Well, I know, but taken on a nationwide scale, it must be a pretty big business.
Well, the U.S. Department of Commerce figures show that people spend 3 times as much on the upkeep of their automobiles and twice as much for legal counsel. Certainly you don't think of hair cutting as being a lucrative business.
No.
Laugh if you want to, Fred, but it just about approximates what is spent on burial services.
But, Uncle George, what kind of a living can a man make today in your profession? From the kind of car you drive around, it seems to me you do all right.
Appearances are often misleading. I feel that I must have a car like that for my business. And, of course, it must be kept in top condition. Altogether, counting real estate, furnishings, automobiles, and equipment, all of which are necessary to maintain a complete establishment, the family's total investment over the years is approximately $100,000. Of course, you realize that credit must be extended to many families. So you can understand that a working capital of a considerable amount must always be available to me. Here is a draft of one of my statements. Everybody does not make them up exactly like this, but the items of cost are quite typical. Here is the cost of the service as selected. These items are nothing more than cash advances. That makes a total of $753. But the only part of this bill that can create a profit for me is the first item of $378. You can see that it was necessary for me to advance $375 without a profit as a courtesy to meet the situation, something no other business is required or expected to do. Last year, I had 201 calls. 7 of these were charity calls, where no charges at all were made. Then here are 3 I classify as no profit, the kind we all have where conditions made me want to do all I could for a family without their feeling that they were accepting charity. In this column are 2 cases where the family could afford to pay an amount that gave them the satisfaction of having bought what they wanted. However, you'll notice that the majority ran from $300 to $500. But speaking of investment, Fred, after you've completed your normal education, it's necessary to have specialized schooling. And on top of that, to serve an apprenticeship of from 1 to 3 years before you can take an examination for a state license. During my apprenticeship, I got $17 a month. But living costs have risen now, and I imagine that if you wanted to come in with me, I'd have to pay you quite a bit more. The thing that gives me the most pleasure in life is my liking to be with people, and the kick I get out of occasionally being able to give them a helping hand when they need it. Perhaps my greatest satisfaction has been in the organization of a teenagers' jalopy club, which meets once a week in my garage. Not so long ago, those kids were piling up cars right and left. Reckless? They were a menace to life itself. For 18 months now, there has not been a single accident, and only 1 boy has received a ticket for a traffic violation. But everybody knows I've always been interested in the young people of our town, or I would not have been on the school board for so many years, or the summer recreation committee, which was instigated by all the churches in town banding together. Religion has always played an important part in my life, and it was largely due to my own faith and a belief in the sacredness of my calling that made my work possible with these men of all beliefs. I received a letter yesterday, Fred. Maybe the story behind it will give you a better idea of what our work is about. Here, read this.
Dear Mr. Bartlett, I wish to thank you sincerely for your kindness and for the help you have been to us. At the service, I was too dazed and grief-stricken to let you know how deeply we all appreciated it. Thank you again so much. Alice Jordan.
The first hours after Mrs. Jordan's husband had gone were almost more than she could bear. Her troubles were aggravated because the Jordan family had not made arrangements for services long before they were actually needed, as many people do. It's in daily situations like that, invariably emergencies, that a man's training and experience come forward to serve his neighbors and friends and all who need his services. Like so many others, Mrs. Jordan needed help when she was least capable of helping herself. And I was able to relieve her mind of many of the questions that had been confusing to her. First, we called the clergyman to determine a convenient time for the service. We always do this, realizing there are many calls upon his time. I spent nearly an hour with Mrs. Jordan, going over all the details, arranging everything as she wanted it. Then, little by little, as we progressed in orderly fashion, Mrs. Jordan's self-assurance returned. Incidentally, Fred, it has always been my practice to mark my prices in plain figures and to display them openly for all to see. This was just the beginning of the services I was able to provide for Mrs. Jordan. One day, out of curiosity, I counted up over 80 items of service which I might be called upon to provide. Such things as being sure that the proper notices went to the papers, and that out-of-town friends were properly notified. It takes over 90 man-hours of staff time to arrange, conduct, and complete the average service. Beside these personal services, there were many legal and routine forms and certificates that had to be filled out. For Mrs. Jordan, it was necessary to make additional arrangements with a mortician in another city. Dunbar's is a metropolitan establishment serving about 5 times as many families as I do. It was fortunate that we were able to have the service at the hour Mrs. Jordan wanted, because they have many more services than we do. Mortuaries like this usually maintain sizable staffs to meet the needs of large cities. Of course, at the other end of the scale, in rural communities, there are places much smaller than ours in Centertown. Other things like buying railroad tickets and arranging for Dunbar and Son to meet the train were but a few of the ways in which I tried to help Mrs. Jordan and give her peace of mind. You'd be surprised, Fred, how taking care of many, many details like these can help to ease a family's troubles. If you choose this as your life's work, Fred, you've got to pretty much subordinate your personal life to the needs of those who need you. Like the minister and the doctor, you've got to be ready to serve at any hour and on the briefest notice, 7 days a week. You've got to be prepared to meet situations of emotional stress with sympathetic understanding. At no other time is there greater need for sincere consideration from an outsider in the performing of a necessary service for a troubled family.
I never really heard the story of the family before. You sincerely like people, don't you?
Certainly I do. Do you, Fred?
Yes, Uncle George, I do.
But it takes more even than that. Your greatest satisfaction of all must come from a desire way down within you to bring comfort to others.